Hello and welcome to Automotive Logistics and Supply Chain Live 2020. I'm Richard Logan, event and content producer here at Automotive Logistics. Welcome back if you've been following us already over the last few days, and welcome to those just tuning in for the first time. There's plenty to catch up on, but right now it's time to shine the spotlight on North America. Joining me today to discuss the state of play, the current and future challenges, and explore what's changed for the North American supply chain in this challenging year are George Grahovac, Assistant Vice President, North America Supply Chain at Honda of America Manufacturing, Richard DeBoer, Executive Vice President at Carter Logistics, and Brandon Mason, Lead Analyst, Global Market Intelligence at Eaton. So welcome, gentlemen. Thanks very much for joining us for this special and important session. So I'd like to kick off and get straight into it by going to you, Brandon. For those of you who haven't had a chance to catch it, Brandon gave an in-depth analysis on the North America supply chain. I highly recommend that you do catch up when you get a chance. But Brandon, perhaps you can give the executive summary to our audience to set the scene for this session.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Yeah, I think I'm getting a little bit of an echo. There we go. Would be happy to. So yeah, again, for those that didn't get to see my presentation from this morning, I think we remain cautiously optimistic here in the U.S. Some of the numbers we've seen, particularly around retail sales demand, have been pretty encouraging over the last few months. I remain a little concerned, or should I say cautious, around as we get into Q4 here, particularly around issues related to the global pandemic, the ability to get a vaccine, or now that the weather's starting to get colder in much of the U.S., what impact that could have. But again, we remain cautiously optimistic for the year. I think we're looking at production down around maybe 20% or so for the region, and then step recovery after that. So plenty of challenges ahead, for us in the industry here in North America. But again, I remain cautiously optimistic that we're through the worst of it at this point.
Great, thanks, Brandon. And we certainly like optimism, even if it is cautious at best. Perhaps I can bring George onto the stage.
Yeah, hi, Richard.
Hi, George.
Much for the opportunity. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning to those maybe on the West Coast. We've had a heck of a ride over the last 6 months. We were impacted with the shutdown and the stay-in-place orders. Primarily, we were essential in manufacturing and ready to run. However, with customers not coming into the dealerships, which is the majority of our sales stream, obviously, sales dropped off pretty dramatically for a period of time. We were shut down for about 7 weeks, came back ready to go, and to our surprise, we came back with some pretty low CBU inventories ready to make cars. So it's been a wild ride.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you don't look like you've been working hard. You look very good, and we're delighted to have you here. So thanks, George, for that update. Let's bring Richard onto the stage.
Hey, Richard.
Hi, Richard. Thanks for joining us. And perhaps you can give us a little bit of an update from Carter Logistics, how things are shaping up for you, kind of post-lockdown.
Yeah, sure. As some of you may know or may not know, we run approximately 850 trucks through several different cross docks throughout the U.S., all company owned. So we have about 600,000 square feet of cross dock space. And when the pandemic hit, we had probably 600 out of our 850 trucks we had to shelve and park while the drivers went on furlough. So coming out of this was very challenging for us. I feel like we came out very nicely. We had different challenges for the tier ones versus the OEMs, but at the end of the day, we performed very well coming out of the COVID.
Yeah, fantastic. And I think you're touching upon a few of the key issues. So let's bring the wider panel all onto the stage so we can really delve into some of these challenges and get the discussion going. So you mentioned network challenges there, Richard. George, as you were ramping up production, how are you dealing and kind of coping with that network capacity?
Yeah, with our ramp up, we suspended production in all of our North American operations on or around March 27th. And we turned the lines back on May 11th, but they were obviously at a much reduced rate in a ramp-up curve that we felt would support not only getting our workers back to work, but also our tier ones up to speed. And as you can imagine, with turning everything back on, that it was state by state within the U.S., and we have 750 tier one suppliers, thousands of sub-tier one suppliers, so across the United States. So understanding all of those conditions and those inventory positions and their startup readiness was quite daunting. So we had to be realistic in our ramp-up curve. At the end of the day, I think we were a little more aggressive than the other OEMs, but we held the course. And once we got the tier ones, our U.S. tier ones up to speed, the next challenge then was Mexico, because Mexico was behind the U.S. in opening, and that provided a new set of challenges with our inventory positions that are north of the border. So it's been a day-by-day challenge, not much unlike our normal crisis management, day-to-day crisis management, maybe some different flares, but it has been challenging, and it has presented opportunities to really bring the team together and fight through this thing like we never have.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like the aggressive stance that you took, and I'm sure that'll prove to be a good call in the long run. So, Brandon, talking about the workforce and that contributing to the network capacity challenges, you gave some analysis on the employment and kind of, can you delve into a little bit what's going on there and what you see from that perspective?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think, we talked early days of the recession, and, we had a pretty big spike in unemployment. Whether that was temporary or ultimately permanent, I think it varied a little bit in terms of what the data said. But then we had the pretty massive unemployment stimulus package from the federal government, which in some cases, there wasn't a lot of incentive for folks to come back to work. In some cases, they may have been making more on unemployment than they were, when they were fully employed. So that presented some unique challenges to the market. But since that's kind of rolled off, I think we're starting to see those numbers trickle back down, still at elevated levels. And we don't expect to get back what I would call, pre-recession or normalized levels for a number of years, but we do seem to be in decent shape right now in terms of the overall unemployment levels.
Well, that's certainly encouraging to hear, and I believe it was referenced in the session prior to this. I believe it was Nissan commenting on the driver shortages challenges that they're facing. So clearly, it's a common issue. And Richard, maybe you can expand on how you're working with your employees, working with your network to kind of get around this issue to ensure that you can still deliver to your customers.
Yeah, we were daily communication with our driver pool throughout the whole COVID, and obviously the plans had changed 2 or 3 different times when the OEMs were going to come up, and it all varied depending upon who the OEM was too. So it was a lot of communication occurred. For the most part, I would say 95% of our driver force returned to work when they were supposed to. The ones that did not, for the most part, they might have retired. They took this opportunity to take a look at it, say, do they want to continue on delivering to docks, be exposed out there in the general public, and we lost approximately 5% of our overall force. And I think to Chris Stiles' point earlier today, that affected kind of performance and delivery performance for us, but also probably through the industry itself. Some other companies might not have been as successful as what we were as far as bringing these drivers back. the issue has been since that point in time is really backfilling these drivers. At the same point in time, there's been this national drug testing coalition that's out there that is sharing everybody's drug tests amongst states, where Indiana was a prototype early on testing it. It was not rolled out to all the states. It is now rolled out to all the states. So if you have a positive drug test in Tennessee, you can't go to Indiana now and hide from that. So that has added some complications. We're finding the quality of candidates have fallen off since coming back. And the candidates being the truck drivers rather than our cross-dock workers. Now, normally we pull a lot of drivers in from schooling systems. We deal with 3 different schools out there. And because of COVID, those schools were shut down. So the pipeline was shut down on all those drivers coming out of the schooling system. And then when the spigot was turned back on, these guys were getting too much money just to stay home. So most of these people would have gone from unemployed to employed. There was no incentive to go to CDL school to bring them out. So not until probably the middle of July, when the government started funding the state of Indiana and giving us grants to put people through school, that pipeline has now opened up. So now we've got recruits coming to us that we can't even get into the CDL schools because the CDL schools are so filled. So I think there is an end in sight as far as a driver shortage, and a lot of it is just kind of flowing out of what's transpired during COVID.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I heard in another discussion, the interesting concept of perhaps, the opportunity to become a driver was becoming less attractive with the pandemic and health and safety becoming an increasing concern about moving around the country. So what that might do to future pipelines. So I don't think we're out of the woods yet in terms of driver shortages. It certainly seems here. And Brandon, you seem to be agreeing with me, which I always like. So let's get your take on that.
No, I mean, like I said, as I said before, I don't think we're out of the woods by any stretch. Again, there's room for cautious optimism across the supply chain. And as I said earlier today, I was pretty impressed that we've seen some cracks in the supply chain, but not a break. With all the issues that Richard and George just talked about, in addition to the plants being down for 2+ months, there was a lot that could have gone wrong, and there still are issues that we're dealing with. But as we get into Q4, I think some of those issues will improve. Some of those issues will be strained even further. And so I don't think anybody's ready to declare victory yet on the downturn and say, oh, we're in a clear path to recovery. I just don't think that's the case. And Richard, you brought up a good point too, that said, well, look, during the downturn, and we're still having to do this, we're kind of have to make changes on the fly, because we've never done this before. We don't know. We don't have a playbook, right? Everybody had to throw out their playbook and create a new one as we've gone along. So I think, communication has been important between the OEs and the suppliers, tier 1s, tier 2s, logistics providers, et cetera, all the way through the chain to make sure that we're giving this our best shot in times of crisis.
Yeah, absolutely. And that brings us, I think, nicely on to communication, which again has been a key topic right across this forum. And George, I know you've personally been on the shop floor. You're doing shifts there. How's the communication kind of changed? And how do you interact with your team moving forward in this new world that we're operating in?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of opportunities for us, and we're learning. Being automotive manufacturing, for example, work from home was never really an option. We would offer it for a flexibility tool in the toolbox, where the expectation was don't use it any more than once a month, use it for emergencies. And now, obviously, we've been forced into it. Our direct support team must, of course, be on site supporting manufacturing, but we have many members. Out of my team, for example, 95% of my team is working from home. And That started, we did have, as Dick mentioned, when we came into this thing, we did have, for the first couple of weeks, we were able to keep the team together, but we did have a furlough period. And at that point, we had a skeleton crew trying to keep the lights on and trying to prepare for the inevitable, which is bringing production back online and getting ready for all of the challenges with that. But once the team did come back in full, then I would say we spent probably the first 3 to 4 weeks in just figuring out how to communicate virtually. And this is not unlike everybody. However, in our case, it was a new for us. And I think our team has done remarkably. Our fiscal year started April 1, so Q1 was in shambles. We took a dramatic hit, and we're now into profit recovery like never before. But during that period, we also had several other longer-term business plan items, and I was blown away at every month that we were reporting through. We didn't have an April results report, but for the May and June and on, we seemed to be hitting our activity targets. So that was telling me that folks were figuring out how to be productive at home and how to communicate with one another while at home. It's still hard to beat a face-to-face meeting, but I will say that working virtually does give you some level of efficiency that being on site, being at the spot, doesn't always provide you.
Yeah, so it's taking those opportunities and really utilizing them, which is essentially what the best of the best in the supply chain do. So great to hear that that's happening at Honda. Richard, I'm going to jump to you. And in your intro, you mentioned that you've been supporting both OEMs and tier suppliers, and that you were supporting them in slightly different ways. Be interested to delve a little deeper into how you're supporting the North American tier supplier community.
Yeah, as far as a tier one supplier, we've been, I think, one thing that happened during COVID, first of all, we've got a lot of suppliers that we move freight for to and from from tier twos into tier ones, first of all. And during COVID, a lot of our cross stocks were filled up with we turned them into warehouses rather than cross stock because the product wasn't moving. The tier ones had no room on their floor for the product. So in fact, we're in a storage mode. We utilize a lot of our trailers that we have for storage also. We stored a lot of product in Laredo that was bound for Mexico. So that was one difference. And when we came out of it, well, when we were in COVID, first of all, some of our customers, they didn't shut all their plants down. So some of the plants were still operating through it. So we went into over communication, whereby we were communicating daily with our tier one suppliers, and they were making decisions on the fly as far as what product to hold, what product must go, not to shut down their tier one plants. So a lot of activity surrounded that tier ones during that down period for 2 months. From an OEM standpoint, the OEMs, for the most part, we cleared our docks. The docks were clear. When they started back up, the collection routes that we had were not totally full. So we were not picking up total collection routes, but we were delivering the product. But we might have had 3 full truckloads a week being delivered to the OEMs during that startup period. So it was much easier on the OEM side to start back up than what it was on the tier one side when we came out of it.
Yeah, absolutely, and interesting to hear those the differences there in complexities that you're having to manage, and really kind of tailoring what you're offering to your different types of customers there. Let's head south of the border, and Mexico, a critical part of the North American supply chain. George, you mentioned it briefly earlier. Brandon, maybe maybe you could sort of set the scene a little bit there for us, and how the kind of the recovery looks there, and how that differs to the US.
Sure. Yeah, it is a little bit of a different story in Mexico. We often just kind of lump everything together in North America and assume that as the US goes, so goes Canada and Mexico. But in this instance, that's not the case. As we've continued to see step improvement, I think, in the US and Canadian markets in terms of demand and the overall economic situation, it's been the opposite in Mexico. A few reasons for that. I think, obviously, the overall wealth of the country and the economics that drive the market there are a little bit different. But I think one of the growing concerns with Mexico is the ability to deal with the pandemic over the long term. And certainly we're no benchmark here in the US in terms of how we've handled it to date. But I think the longer term impact for Mexico remains high priority or high concern for a lot of folks. So whereas the US market, as I said, is probably going to be down from a sales perspective, let's call it anywhere from like 17 to 22% this year. But that outlook continues to improve, every month as we see these better than expected sales results. The Mexican market's going to be down probably around 25 to 30% this year in terms of sales. So it just goes to show you that the confidence level is not as good there. The GDP outlook has continued to erode, I think, over the last quarter in terms of where they're at. I think they're going to expect it to be down around 10% this year in terms of GDP growth, compared to the US, which is, in the neighborhood of, let's say 4.5%, somewhere around there. So it's a little bit different. Now, the assembly footprint's also different because obviously a lot of that volume, there's high demand to go back into the US. So assembly will be down around the same as the rest of the region, which is in that 20% margin. But as was mentioned earlier, they had a little bit different timetable around their plant shutdown and ramp back up. So if you think about the broader economic situation there and that country's ability to control the virus, should that get out of hand, and we talked about work shortages and the ability to keep the plants going and the lights on, that is one of those concerns that we're keeping a close eye on in terms of red flags that could have a significant impact on the supply chain if, let's say the virus gets out of control in Q4 there and a lot of those plants start shutting down. That's going to impact, obviously, the supply chain to the US and abroad.
Yeah, absolutely. And I see George nodding there. So perhaps a good time to bring you in and kind of get your take on what's happening with your cross-border activities.
Sure. Yeah, Brandon's right on. It's a volatile situation. The U.S. is volatile as well. I mean, we're continuing to struggle with labor. Just flipping back to the previous question, communication between our teams is never been stronger nor more frequent than ever before. We have weekly, formal weekly critical supplier stability meetings. We have our formal sales and production meetings that were top exec meetings, normally monthly, are generally weekly. Prior that 2 times a week, multiple times per week, where we're trying to align demand as it's coming online, as the dealerships are ramping back up, and we're getting a better picture of the sales orders that are coming in, trying to align that to the model lineup for production, obviously trying to look at the most profitable models first, but then closely tying that to our supplier situation. So in the U.S., the biggest is still the labor issue. We are tracking that situation. Proactive attendance reports are being sent out to hundreds of suppliers to try to understand their situation and are they going to be able to produce the required parts. In many cases in the U.S., we just we're hand to mouth. We don't have those depots, if you will, or strategic reserves. In some cases we do, but for the vast majority of the suppliers, we do not. And then comes Mexico. Generally, in the best of times, we try to carry 5 to 10 days of inventory north of the border. The tier ones that are in Mexico are required to keep that much inventory north of the border. They tend to do that in somewhere between 50 and 60 warehouses that we have at the crossing points. And, that was when we started up, that inventory was quickly eroded, and we were into premium freight out of Mexico, out of Texas, and just trying to keep the plants running. But as the Mexico suppliers were coming back online, and we were trying to decelerate and trying to give them put them in the best possible position to fill the pipeline, fill that 5 to 10 day inventory pipeline back up. It's a constant struggle. To this day, we have a couple tier ones, major tier ones in the U.S. that struggle with tier 2 and below components coming out of Mexico, and that has definitely caused us some pain. So, it's weekly calls, sometimes daily calls, management escalation like I've never seen before, prioritization of plants and models, and of course, premium freight when it's appropriate.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I think the message is clear there. There's still there's optimism, but there's still a lot of challenges both in the US and clearly in Mexico. And Richard, anything to kind of add on the cross-border logistics from your side?
Yeah. From a transportation standpoint, it threw us into a loop because we plan on having that border balanced between northbound and southbound, and with the U.S. going down before Mexico, it created a lot of imbalance at the border, and likewise. Now, Mexico coming back up a little bit later than the U.S. has created the reverse flow of problems at the border. So from a profitability standpoint, we rely on that border to be balanced. When it's not, it definitely affects our bottom line. The second thing is that teams, during COVID, I really didn't touch on it, but our teams they're much more difficult to recruit. Obviously, you're now spending time in a cab of a truck with another individual. A lot of people are not real comfortable with that. And you've got an issue that with premium freight going on to try to get everything balanced, a lot of people are calling out for teams. So you got a supply and demand issue currently going on out there with team traffic, north and south. Mostly north coming out of the border into the U.S. plants. The only other item is within the borders of Mexico, we've got a couple cross docks. Obviously, with the plants being down there, the suppliers kind of followed it. And it was very difficult to schedule appointment times to have those suppliers have the product ready to bring into our cross docks in Mexico for delivery. So we had a lot of challenges down there. Coming out of COVID within the borders and at the border itself.
Yeah, absolutely. So still plenty going on there, a lot of work to do. And I want to shift the conversation slightly and talk about collaboration. And again, something you've touched upon, I think, before, Brandon, and is clearly happening in the market is collaboration and partnerships within the automotive industry. We've had some pretty high-profile collaborations and announced and in recent times. What's your kind of take on that? And is this trend set to continue?
Yeah, I think if you take away anything from that, I would say that it's only just beginning. Right, over the last several years, we've seen increased joint ventures, and at Eaton we've got several joint ventures, and I think the goal there was to expedite your market presence or invest in technology that you previously hadn't. There are a number of reasons to get into some of those partnerships. Obviously, cost savings is a big component of that. You think about the different alliance groups from the OEs that we see around the world, and sort of lately the reshuffling of those alliances. I think that it's inevitable that those are going to continue. I do think that you'll see further consolidation in the industry, and we've seen over the last just the last few weeks and months a slew of partnerships that have been announced around new and emerging technologies. So yeah, I think that's going to continue to play a larger and larger role in our industry, and in parallel with the overall transformation that we're going through. Right, shifting gradually from combustion engine vehicles to electrified vehicles. increased levels of autonomy. There's a lot of things that are driving that change, but cost savings, emergence of technology, and the ability to offset some of the investment costs for those all seem to be big drivers that aren't going away anytime soon. So as I said, it's only just beginning. I think an accelerated amount of those partnerships, acquisitions, et cetera, are going to continue to happen in the industry.
Okay, well, you heard it here, so we wait with bated breath to hear the next announcements. Yeah, thank you, Brandon, and bringing George and Richard back, talking about collaboration, partnerships. Perhaps you can share some examples of how you're working with your customers, working with your partners, respectively. This need, as Brandon mentioned, for greater collaboration to support and get through these times and move forward. Please share something on that.
Did you ask me to? Richard?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. I wasn't so sure if that question was pointed at George or myself. There is a need for it, a huge need, and we completed a $5 million expansion at one of our facilities in the Southeast last year. We've got 2 major OEMs now sharing, or about ready to share the freight going into that facility. We also have 1 major OEM on deck, ready to make a decision, and we got a 4th OEM it's in an evaluation mode. So there's a lot of opportunities to drive cost out. There's probably 2 million wasted miles currently going on in overlap miles in the Southeast. We're running about 85 routes a day into our facility, into our cross dock, and a lot of them are duplicative miles and waste that's going on. Our group has identified where that waste occurs. Obviously, identifying the waste is much easier than solving it. And that's something that George and his team, along with the other OEMs through collaboration, are really working on to make sure that everybody is in agreement on the best terms and conditions to consolidate these routes, because it all affects their production. So yeah, there is a lot of collaboration going on. I'm getting a lot more activity from OEMs asking us about it and what we're doing. We move a lot of product in and out of our Vandalia, Ohio facility also for OEMs. That's another major hub of ours that potentially has opportunity for consolidations in the future.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. And George, from your perspective?
Sure. There's more and more collaboration than ever before. Going back to Brandon's comment, we had the official announcement, I believe it was now April, while we were on furlough, or right as we were going on furlough, with the tie-up of Honda and GM to collaborate on an EV platform. So that has been announced already. And again, that's a function of research R&D dollars and trying to minimize the R&D dollars and the required tooling changes for parts, suppliers, and lines. So that's out there. That's on the table. We also just announced another tie-up with GM, a little bit more general. We've had a couple other projects, specific projects such as this EV platform project, but we just issued the memorandum of intent for other business sharing. So I think that's going to open up the door with other opportunities. We are sharing some freight with them at another cross dock. And we, as Dick mentioned, he was a little elusive there, but I'll offer up that we are one of the OEMs that Carter is supporting in this shared network. And it's more important than ever before. We have a driver situation that, and this isn't new information, and it's not necessarily due to COVID. We talked about this in the Automotive Logistics Conference last year, that to be more and more efficient because of driver issues, because of trying to create more green miles, and just trying to make our operations as profitable as possible, the next bastion or the next area that we had to get into was sharing freight on routes that are in network like never before. Of course, we do that on LTL, but in network planned freight and trying to optimize that and trying to maximize that on a more dynamic basis as opposed to fixed routing, which normally has been the case, more important than ever before. As I mentioned, we're always looking to improve profitability. This year is unlike any year that we've seen in terms of needing to do that. So COVID just put a couple extra exclamation points on the need to do that. We're going to continue. We're going to be open to it, and we're going to continue to look for as many sharing opportunities and strategic partnerships that make sense, and that we can manage. You know, some people say that the shared networking adds some complexity. In some respects, it probably does, and I think that's more around the dynamic routing and the requirements to try to be as efficient as possible on those inbound routes, those pickup routes coming into the cross docks. But the thing that's not looked at so much is the complexity that's currently going on with the tier ones. The tier ones, as Dick mentioned, they've got 4 or 5 different customers coming at them, hitting them up at the same time sometimes. And we can't always coordinate all of our pickup times and our window times. So as a result, for these small suppliers that have 1 or 2, 3 pickup docks, and you got 5 docks, 5 trucks that are showing up to pick it up, as opposed to what could be, which is 1 truck picking up a whole bunch of freight and bringing it into a docking net and crossing it and shuttling it out of the dock. That reduces the burden on the tier ones dramatically. And that's really what we're after. We're of course we want to improve our efficiency and our spend, but we also are looking for reducing the impact on our tier ones. We know that we really sometimes drag our tier ones all over the place with how we're connected to the manufacturing operations, and we're really trying to look for any and all opportunities to reduce that burden when it makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that's really exciting and encouraging to hear. Collaboration is a term that's used a lot, but fantastic to hear you delving into some of those examples there and hear the work that you're doing with Richard and the team at Carter, and also that you're looking for more, and this is clearly the way the industry is going to go. So that's a really positive note. We're running very short on time. Our next session is getting geared up to go, but I just want to do a final round robin, so just a final 30 seconds each. Kind of, what's exciting you in supply chain right now, and let's leave on a positive note. I'll start with you, Brandon.
Well, perhaps I'll just speak more generally. Again, remain cautiously optimistic. Everybody should stay safe out there, and let's get back to as much of a normal sense as we can. But I think we're also accelerating a lot of exciting emerging opportunities. We talked before about mobility, electric vehicles, et cetera. So there's a lot of good things to come in the industry. So let's just keep our focus and everybody stay safe.
Great. Some wise words there. Thank you, Brandon. And yeah, moving to you, Richard. Your final thoughts, please.
Yeah, the reception that we're getting out there in the marketplace for OEMs and also tier ones is probably, for collaboration, probably is at the height. Everybody's coming out of reduced profitability for 2 months, 3 months, as a supply chain is also, and is trying to make sure that they're changing their structure to save money. And it's very exciting. It's very exciting, and I'm glad to be involved in it. And then there's plants being launched in the next 2 to 3 years that I'm very excited about, to be involved in those launches of those plants with the other OEMs. So exciting time to be in the industry. Obviously, the beginning of the year was not real good, but hopefully everybody's getting encouragement from this conference that things have turned.
Yeah, that's great, Richard. Thank you. And George, just the final word from you.
Sure. You know, I think there's a lot of upside. Brandon and his information, I think they did a fantastic job in trying to show what the future might look like. I think he was right on with the numbers at 20% down in sales for August, which was a little bit off from what we expected, but it is the end of the summer period, which is usually the peak period. We're expecting to come into the fall and be able to maintain our position and, if not, even more market share moving forward. And, you know, our strategy from a supply chain management standpoint in automotive logistics, it really hasn't changed a whole lot with COVID. COVID has put, as I mentioned, a couple exclamation points on it and really has driven the need to push the accelerator pedal down as much as possible. But we want to continue to do the right things. We want to keep people safe. We want to, but at the same time, we want to maintain our strategic path, which is trying to make the supply chain as effective and as efficient as possible, trying to reduce loss and waste for our own supply chain, but also supply chains of our tier one suppliers and below. And we're going to continue to be aggressive on the collaboration, on the tools, on the visibility tools that provides us you know, an ability to make quick and accurate decisions. That's an area that we've struggled with in the past. And we're going to continue to look for automation. You know, labor is going to continue to be an issue, whether that's material handling automation or process automation. The RPAs and the systematic robotics and AI that's out there. It's pretty amazing stuff, and we just have to continue to move forward and leverage the technology that's out there as much as possible.
Yeah, fantastic. And, you know, I think there's been some great insights there and takeaways. And yeah, just want to say thank you, gentlemen, for joining me, being part of this penultimate session of this great conference. So thank you. And to our audience, we're just moments away from the final session of Automotive Logistics and Supply Chain Live. That's with my colleague Christopher Ludwig, who's doing a one-to-one interview with Bo Anderson, CEO and President of Yazaki Corporation. So that'll be one that you certainly won't want to miss. You've just got time to go get another cup of tea, a cup of coffee, and sit back and enjoy. Thank you so much. I'm Rich Logan, signing off.